Haley declared the United States will remember this day in which it was singled out for attack when we are called upon to once again make the world's largest contribution. Sunday night, she kept that promise, and it was a reminder to the UN's member states that the U.S. and its representation in the United Nations is under new management, a management that draws red lines and apparently, from what we've seen, enforces them. John?
So we're hearing Guatemala might not be the only nation to join the U.S.?
That's right. According to Israel's deputy foreign minister, at least 10 other countries have expressed interest in moving their embassies from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Guatemala's President Jimmy Morales has also announced on his Facebook page his intention to do so. Quote, "I have given instructions to the foreign ministry that it start the necessary respective coordination to make this happen." That announcement was met with praise from the Israeli Foreign Ministry, which has long appreciated Guatemala being one of the first countries to support the creation of a Jewish state back in 1947.
Israel says thank you very much to Guatemala. We believe that this is a just and correct decision, and it reflects also the deep friendship between our two countries.
The decision to recommend the embassy move was immediately condemned by Palestinians. One member of the Palestinian legislature noting that the U.S. and Guatemala are in the minority of world opinion on this matter.
The decision of the president of Guatemala to move the embassy to Jerusalem means he is participating in violating international law, which prohibits the annexation of occupied territories. The majority of the world is on our side, and the decision of one country like Guatemala will not change that.
The Israeli Foreign Ministry has not said which other countries are contemplating moving their embassies to Jerusalem, but some media reports suggest that Honduras may be the next. John, back to you.
Keeping an eye on it for us from Washington, Doug McKelway. Doug, thank you.
So there's a new wrinkle in the feud between President Trump and this time Senator Jeff Flake, with the Arizona Republican now leaving open the possibility of challenging him in 2020.
I do wonder, and I do worry, that in the future we'll be faced with maybe President Trump running for re-election on one side, drilling down hard on a diminishing base, and on the other side you might have somebody like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren on the far left of the Democratic Party. That leaves a huge swath of voters in the middle that may be looking for something else.
But you are open to running for president in 2020?
I don't rule anything out, but it's not in my plans.
Joining us now, Michael Meehan, President and CEO of Squared Communications and former Chief of Staff for Senator Maria Cantwell, and Brian McGuire, Republican strategist and former Chief of Staff for Senator Mitch McConnell. Thank you both for talking to us today. So Flake basically, who plans to retire, by the way, isn't necessarily announcing a run for president here, but he's not exactly saying that he isn't. What is he saying?
Brian, me?
Michael, go ahead.
Sorry, okay. So
Sorry.
I think Senator Flake has sized up the situation right. Trump's going to be going to a much smaller base. The trouble in a Republican primary process is primaries and caucuses, his 35% will carry the day. It carried him to the White House, to the nomination in 2016. So keeping that smaller base energized. The trouble for him would be in a general election where there is a much wider middle. So I think he's sized that up. But he was in political trouble before he announced his retirement. He was going to have a hard time winning his primary against Kelly Ward in Arizona, and he's going to have a hard time if he were to win that to beat the Democrat in the Senate race. And so, our politics these days doesn't have much room in the middle. Definitely in the primary process, both the left and the right tend to go to left and right candidates on both sides.
Okay, but if you're talking far left, far right, for those voters who want to vote somewhere in the middle, and Brian, I think that's what Flake is referring to, that if there is a Bernie Sanders or an Elizabeth Warren who chooses to run up against President Trump, maybe a moderate could potentially be, I guess, a huge challenge.
Yeah, it's an appealing thought, but I think the reality is that Republicans tend to come home and to support whoever the incumbent or whoever the nominee is And my view is that if someone was going to try to mount a campaign against the president, which I think is highly unlikely from his own party, then that would be the surest way of ensuring that Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren ended up getting the election themselves. I think that you end up dividing the party, and you know this is not a good time to be talking about it when the party is extremely united after the tax vote the other day.
Yeah, but I mean, in the interview, though, you know, ABC News, you know, basically got Flake to talk about the president inviting a Republican challenge based on the way the president has conducted himself while in office. And basically, what Flake is doing in this piece that I want to air is highlighting the fact that while yes, the Republicans came in and they were united on the tax overhaul, they're not necessarily all united behind closed doors. As we know, there are a lot of GOP members that have been very vocally against the president. Let's listen to Flake here.
I do believe if the president is running for re-election, if he continues on the path that he's on, that's going to leave a huge swath of voters looking for something else.
So you're saying if he is the Republican nominee, again, we're likely to see an independent candidate, whether or not it's you.
I think he's inviting that. He's probably inviting a Republican challenge as well, but certainly an independent challenge, yes.
Michael, do you think that President Trump has anything to worry about with Republicans that maybe he has butted heads with in his own party looking to challenge him?
Oh, absolutely, for sure. I think, look, you know, in 2015, Donald Trump was a Democrat when he came down the escalators at Trump Tower, and then he won the Republican nomination, and now he's running the Republican Party. So clearly anything is possible. It's been a long time since an independent, almost 30 years, managed to get about 20% of the vote. The difference in a primary and a general election is in the primary, you don't need to win a majority to win. These states are decided by proportional representation. So having a Republican Party challenge, I can't imagine that unless somehow you lose the House and Senate in 2018 and the president continues to dip. But I mean, that's a lot of ifs, and he does keep his base super motivated. So there's definitely that. It's just a question of whether that Flake could beat him in a nomination or run as a third-party candidate.
Right. Well,
that's the big question.
And I mean, when it comes to a third-party candidate, I mean, Jeff Flake is basically saying, Brian, that President Trump is certain to face an independent challenge in the next presidential election. But when you talk about an independent candidate running an election where it's a re-election for a president, if anything, you're just going to hurt your own party because you're not necessarily your chances of winning are so slim that really what you're doing, you're taking votes away from that Republican. So you're basically handing it to the Democrats. What Republican would want to do that?
I think that, again, the net result of a Republican challenging or a Republican-leaning independent challenging an incumbent Republican like President Trump would be to hand the election to a Democrat. And, you know, what a political party is a collection of interests who come together around certain shared goals. And I think what Republicans have shown this year is that they are willing to come together around shared goals. And at the end of the year, they showed that they had a very robust list of accomplishments that they can point to if they do come together, which they did. And so I think that right now the party is very unified, and heading into 2018, any talk of people challenging the president from within the party is extremely premature and not where the party really is.
All right, Brian McGuire, Michael Meehan, thank you. Sorry for the long, awkward pause at the beginning. Michael, I thought I had said or addressed the first question to you, but that was fun.
No worries.
Anyway, I always love nice silence every once in a while. All right, thanks, guys.
Gives you time.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, exactly. You know, we need to be quiet every once in a while and just sit and be quiet.
Meditation. A deadly attack in Afghanistan's capital to tell you about. At least 10 people are dead. Who the suicide bomber targeted. And progress in the fight against ISIS as that terror group is routed from Iraq and Syria. But who gets the credit? President Trump or the Obama administration?
So we're ordering $4 billion worth of missile defense, and that will be done by signing right here. Our military has been doing a fantastic job in so many ways with ISIS, and everything they're touching lately has been working out.
ISIS taking responsibility for a suicide bombing in Afghanistan. It happened yesterday in the capital of Kabul. The Interior Ministry saying the bomber blew himself up outside an office of the intelligence service as people arrived for work. At least 10 people were killed and several others injured. President Trump was briefed on the attack.
Although ISIS still maintains a presence in the Middle East, there's been major progress in the fight against that terror group. It lost major strongholds in Iraq and Syria this year. Many credit President Trump for that. Others argue the Obama administration laid the groundwork. Our Lucas Tomlinson is live at the Pentagon with a look at everything here. How close is ISIS to being completely routed from Iraq and Syria, Lucas?
John, a top U.S. diplomat says ISIS has lost 98% of the territory it once held. Half those losses coming since President Trump took office. Critics say the rules of engagement during the Obama administration were onerous, with the White House sometimes waiting weeks to pick targets.
The Obama administration micromanaged the war, and what the Trump administration did was allow execution decisions to be made in accordance with the guidance that he provided. We could have accomplished our objectives through the use of overwhelming power in 3 months, not 3 years.
Today, the U.S. military says less than 1,000 ISIS fighters remain, most concentrated in a small area along the Syria and Iraq border, seen here on the map in red. ISIS at one point controlled an area the size of Ohio. But a former senior director for counterterrorism in the Obama White House pushed back on any criticism the former president didn't do enough to crush ISIS.
This was a top priority. I mean, from the early days of ISIS gaining the type of territorial safe haven it gained, in particular, there was a recognition that safe haven for terrorist groups can mean terrorist plots that extend not just into the region, but into Europe or conceivably into the United States.
While ISIS has largely been defeated, it continues to call on attacks here in the United States during the holidays, and a new message just sprouted up today, John.
So you can wipe out a terror group or its members, but can you wipe out their ideology? Will this thing ever be gone completely?
Well, John, the U.S. ambassador to the anti-ISIS coalition says don't expect a complete defeat of ISIS anytime soon.
ISIS became a brand, and a lot of pre-existing terrorist groups, you've seen this in the Sinai, for example, start to raise the flag of ISIS, mainly to recruit foreign fighters and other things.
In addition to ISIS, an old foe has taken root in Syria and could take on a bigger priority next year.
A lot of folks, when they think about al-Qaeda, probably still think of its center of gravity as being on that Afghanistan-Pakistan border. But I would think of the center of gravity for al-Qaeda really having shifted to Syria at this point.
And that suicide attack yesterday in Kabul, Afghanistan, John, ISIS claimed responsibility. John?
Lucas Tomlinson at the Pentagon for us. Lucas, thank you.
Well, President Trump back to work on his 2018 agenda with low approval ratings despite delivering on several campaign promises this year. So is the president not getting the credit he deserves? We're going to discuss it with our guest coming up. Plus, a tragic Christmas Eve for a police officer and his family. What we are now learning about the driver involved in this officer's death.
We lost not only a hero, but a son, a brother, husband, and a father to a senseless act and an irresponsible decision. Many families have been impacted by this incident, as well as the citizens of California that Officer Camilleri swore to protect.
New information to tell you about on the deadly Christmas Eve crash that killed a California Highway Patrol officer. Officer Andrew Camilleri was in the passenger seat of a patrol car when it was hit by a suspected drunk driver. The 33-year-old officer just joined the California Highway Patrol just last year. He leaves behind a wife and 3 children. The officer in the driver's seat suffered minor injuries. Now, the suspect was reportedly speeding and under the influence of alcohol.
Well, it's been a busy 2017 for President Trump, but despite his accomplishments, he doesn't seem to get a lot of respect from some quarters of the mainstream media. Wall Street Journal editorial board member Bill McGurn writes, quote, "This time 1 year ago, the assumption dominating political coverage was that the only people more stupid than Donald Trump were the deplorables who elected him. Since then, of course, President-elect Trump has become President Trump. Over his 11 months in office, he has put Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court and 4 times as many judges on the appellate courts as Barack Obama did his first year, recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, withdrawn from the Paris Climate Accord, and yet that Mr. Trump is a very stupid man remains the assumption dominating his press coverage." The author of those words, Bill McGurn of the Wall Street Journal, joins us now. And in your column, you include yourself as one of those who was skeptical, I guess, of this president.
I never thought Donald Trump was stupid, but when he first started, you look at other populists, Jesse Ventura, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and they started with high expectations, high approval ratings. They got some of what they originally wanted through, and then it really fizzled and ended in failure and
Ventura
disillusionment.
didn't even get reelected. Didn't run for re-election.
Right, just didn't run. So the question was, what would make Donald Trump any different? And I thought, like a lot of populists, he might fizzle out. He might, be like a comet, but pleasantly surprised that he wasn't.
Of his achievements, what do you consider number one?
That's hard to say, depending on domestic or foreign policy. Domestically, I think the tax cuts have to be the biggest achievement, because there's a reason we haven't done it in 30-something years. It's really difficult. I mean, you can cut taxes, but to reform the tax code, I think that's a big achievement. And he's also used his executive authority in a way that he seems to be unaware of third rails. Other people that are more trained in politics say, oh, we have to put off the Jerusalem decision, can't get out of a climate accord, and he's just done them. And I think he's shown you can do things. If you just say you're going to do it and make good on it, you don't have to accede to the dominant orthodoxy in Washington.
There was a book about President George W. Bush, Misunderestimated.
Right.
Do you think that the press is underestimating this president?
I think so. I think, look, I've covered a lot of people. I've covered a lot of people I don't like. I think it's a very debilitating assumption for your judgment to go in and have such intense dislike for someone, because it clouds your judgment. I think a lot of these people miss these achievements. Really, could a dummy get all these things done? I think you have to ask yourself. I also asked in the piece, for a show of hands, how many people that are constantly telling us how stupid Donald Trump is predicted he wouldn't win the presidency publicly, and some predicted if by some miracle he did win, he could never get anyone decent to work for him. And I think he's assembled a formidable cabinet, and he's done certainly more than I had expected.
Well, we had a panel on the last hour talking about the future possibility, the prospects of Democrats at the polls this come November, and Democrats seem to be chomping at the bit. But I wonder, if this economy catches fire, as it seems to be doing. I mean, unemployment is down, huge job creation, 3% plus economic growth. Those are things that the Obama administration would have loved to have.
Yeah, look, I say there's three things. I understand their enthusiasm for 2018. Usually a president loses seats, and his party loses seats in the midterms. So they have that going for them. President Trump's a polarizing figure, so just as President Obama presided over a lot of Democratic losses, there's an enthusiasm gap, and the Democrats enjoy that. And plus, in the generic ballot, people prefer Democrats. But sooner or later, they're going to have to get flesh and blood candidates to have real positions to their people. And is it going to be just, we hate Donald Trump? I don't know.
Yeah, and there are a lot of Republicans, dyed-in-the-wool Republicans, who do not embrace this president.
Right. So they have an advantage. They see an advantage. I still think you have to have a message, and I still think you have to have good candidates. And I don't see the Democratic Party reconsidering its identity politics, its extremism on issues such as abortion and economic growth, apparently, with not a single Democrat going for this package.
Is it possible that the president uses his Twitter feed as sort of a shiny object to distract the press while he's over here operating the levers of government?
I don't know. I mean, there's times I wish he wouldn't use it quite as much as he does on some of the issues that he does. But yeah, I think this is one of the dangers of disliking someone so intensely. You overlook what they're doing, and a lot of his enthusiastic followers love the Twitter stuff, because it's clearly Donald Trump. It's not filtered. When I was in the White House, we filtered everything, right? And this is just unfiltered.
Bill McGurn from the Wall Street Journal.
Thanks, John.
Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas to you.
Thanks. Julie.
So, John, some travelers amidst the holiday rush, not us, but there are many out there, had even more to complain about at one major airport. It's all because of one passenger. We'll tell you who that person is. Plus, homeowners in high-tax states looking for ways to save money before the new tax code takes effect. We're going to take a look at its impact on Americans.
The bottom line is this is the biggest tax cuts and reform in the history of our country. This is bigger than actually President Reagan's many years ago.
A big backup at an Orlando airport security checkpoint during the holiday rush. Apparently, police say a passenger tried to bring a gun and ammunition on a plane in a carry-on bag. And though the passenger had a valid concealed weapons license, federal law prohibits people from carrying weapons through airport checkpoints. Well, he is now facing charges.
This is having an even bigger impact faster than I thought. The corporate tax rate, as you know, will be lowered from 35% to 21%. That means that more products will be made in the USA. A lot of things are going to be happening in the USA. We're going to bring back our companies that they've already started coming back. I think they had certain confidence in me. They figured we were going to get this done, but they have already started.
That's President Trump touting his $1.5 trillion tax bill, which he signed into law just Friday. But the new measure caps state and local tax deductions at $10,000, sending homeowners in high-tax states like New York scrambling to prepay their 2018 property taxes before year's end. Scott Hodge is president of the Tax Foundation. There's been a lot of concern and questions about what happens to these taxpayers in SALT states, the state and local taxpayers, people who are paying fairly high taxes but won't be able to deduct as many of those taxes from their federal income taxes. Are the taxpayers in the SALT states going to get burned?
It appears that a lot of these folks are going to face a sea change in their state and local taxes. These high-tax states, especially the politicians like Governor Cuomo, the new governor in New Jersey, California, et cetera, are going to have to think loud and hard about the kinds of taxes that they impose on their local citizens, because the federal government simply won't be covering it anymore through the state and local tax deduction.
So you think that this could motivate some of these higher tax states, again, New York, California, New Jersey, to revamp their tax system?
In fact, I think that starting January 1, we're going to have 50 state tax debates because, number one, each state has to decide how it's going to conform to the federal tax system. A lot of states link their tax systems to the federal tax code, so they're going to have to figure out which areas of the new federal system they're going to conform their local tax systems to. But in particular, these high tax states, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, et cetera, which have especially high property taxes and high income taxes, they're going to have to rethink those taxes because they can no longer pass along those costs to Uncle Sam.
And people are already noticing. Listen to Paul Feiner. He is the town supervisor of Greenburgh. I'm going to listen. All right, that's a quote. I'm sorry. I thought we had him on tape, but he says, I'm getting swamped with many, many calls, usually 1 an hour, from people who want to prepay their taxes. Practically all the officials in Westchester, that's the county where he's talking about, are being swamped with calls. I mean, people clearly notice taxation levels.
Well, they get a one-time reprieve here by prepaying their property taxes this year, and so that they don't have to face the limit on property tax deductions next year. Now, you can't do that with your income taxes. You can only prepay your property taxes. So this is like a one-time reprieve. Now, next year, you are going to be limited in terms of how much of your state and local deduction you can take, and that is limited to $10,000. Now, for most Americans, this will not be a big deal at all. Their state and local taxes are well below that. In fact, most people will end up taking the standard deduction rather than itemizing their income taxes anyway, so they'll be reprieved from this at the end of the day anyway.
But are the politicians in those high tax states going to take notice? Are they going to be hearing from their constituents, or are constituents going to take out their anger on people at the federal level, President Trump and the Republican-led Congress?
I think we're already seeing some moves at the state level to start to change their tax code. In fact, the new governor of New Jersey, who was proposing a millionaire's tax, has rescinded that and said, well, I think we're going to think twice about passing this millionaire's tax because they can no longer pass that along to Uncle Sam. I think this will force a lot of tax competition at the state and local level. Especially low-tax states will now have much bigger advantage over these high-tax states because their taxes are low, and so they're going to be much more attractive to new businesses and for people who want to move from these high-tax states and find a little bit better tax climate for their jobs.
Doesn't it also, frankly, hurt property values in the high-tax states?